Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking time out of your busy schedule to interact with us. My name is Kartik Singh, and I'm the co-founder of Rebel Girls. So, along with my sister Nitya, Rebel Girls is a youth-led platform that aims to allow students to interact with extraordinary women, those who have done something unique in their lives. So, ma'am, this interview is just a brief way for us to make our audience aware of your journey and important subjects such as child rights and safety. The theme of this session is with connection with the current Child Safety Week and maintaining protection for both children and women. So, ma'am, my first question is, could you tell us a bit about your journey and what inspired you to become a lawyer and work on women's rights and children's rights?
This is going to sound far less dramatic than what one might hope for in an answer like this. Honestly, I think I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was pretty young, and I can't think of what could have inspired me other than the TV shows I used to watch. So if I have to credit it to anything, the inspiration probably comes from the practice. But having said that, I was always kind of clear that whatever it is that I do should make a difference to somebody. As a growing up, whenever I thought about being a lawyer, I always kind of had an example in my head of MC Mehta and his environmental campaigns that were huge at the time. On whether it was cleaning up rivers, whether it was, even taking down billboards in the city, things that you could actually see happening around you. And that was always a bit of an inspiration for me. But I have to say, I think I've always been instinctively drawn to women's rights. And I really don't know where that comes from. Upbringing, perhaps more than anything else. It's something that was, dinned into me from a very young age. We're a family of sisters. And it's always been about female solidarity in our house, and I think that is something that has always stayed. So I can't really, it's really far more of an organic journey than some kind of aha moment. But and then I went to law school. I studied at Nalsar in Hyderabad, and I think it also helped that some of these things often always happen by chance. It is a lot of times you'll find that the path you end up on is because that's the subject in which you had a great inspirational professor, for example. A lot of times it's just very coincidental like that. There's no predetermined logic behind it. So while I went into law school with a vague idea of wanting to do something socially relevant, it really did get crystallized by the fact that we had such amazing professors at Nalsar who were such giants in their field and so committed to the cause of social justice. That really is the biggest inspiration. Professor Amita Dhanda, who's taught us at Nalsar, is possibly the professor who had the single biggest impact on my choices. Professor Sri Krishna Dev Rao, who's currently the Vice Chancellor of the university where I'm teaching, he taught me criminal law. When I was at Nalsar, he was my professor there. I think it's just had I had, had these people who I had to connect with been teaching me other subjects, it might have been something different. But it just so happened that the people I ended up being most inspired by were the ones also working in the field of social justice. And I started out litigating, and I was doing a very mainstream litigation kind of practice. And this was something that women's rights was something that I was always interested in. I wrote about, I was fairly active, even, while being a litigator, a bit of an activist. I don't know if you remember, but I think sometime this would have been oh God, this would have been about 13 years ago now. There was something that we had organized called the Pink Chatty campaign.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah. Well, you would have been what, 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just horrible. That's just terrible to think about that you would have been 4. Um, so it was just for the uninitiated, it was basically a counter to a group of right-wing moral police um, running rampant in Karnataka, and it just was a very irreverent, tongue-in-cheek kind of protest where we used social media and had these irreverent, cheeky kind of posters up saying this Valentine's Day, send the Sri Ram Sena, pink underwear, pink chaddi. And, we collected so many people were sending them directly, people were sending them through us. I think at the end of it, about 40,000 pairs of pink underwear reached their offices. And,
Wow.
it's something that later on really did make me think more deeply about the kind of social movement and protest that works. Sometimes you want to go for something like shock value and be more provocative. Sometimes you really need to engage in a dialogue and maybe sometimes just bite your tongue and not necessarily be so opinionated, but hear the other person out. And maybe that's more important today when things are so polarized. So I don't really know what I would think, but it was certainly a great learning experience at the time, and something that again really illustrates different kinds of ways in which social protest and all can happen. Yeah. So through that, then I got a huge break when I was invited to be part of the Justice Verma Committee as a researcher. And I was pretty young then, and I was just 28. But that's something that really catalyzed, just because our work was so wide-ranging. We looked at a whole host of laws, not just reforms to rape laws, but we looked at so many other issues, and that was an amazing experience. After that, I actually used my LLM as a sort of transition to move out of mainstream litigation and more into rights litigation and academia. So that's what I used my LLM at Columbia Law School in New York, which I started in 2013. So the year the Justice Verma report came out, which is in January 2013. In August, I left for my master's. And that's really what I specialized in my master's. Gender equality, theory of change, social justice, women's rights, all of those things, gave me great theoretical and practical exposure. And that's actually a great way to transition if you want to, change career course midway or something. A degree is a really great way to do it. And then that's when I came back and moved more into academia and, very focused rights-based litigation and policy work.
Oh, wow. I mean, I do agree that sometimes when you want to pursue something, you don't always have to have that aha moment. Like even when I started learning about women's rights, it was also like just from my family and 2 sisters that I have. So it depends on where you start. It doesn't always have to be something intense.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me to my next question. What were some challenges you faced while working with different organizations and companies to enforce issues such as protection for children and safety? And because those are issues that I've seen usually get pushed around. And how did you overcome those challenges?
So I think one of the biggest challenges is that organizations, I can talk specifically in the context of, say, the sexual harassment, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Workplace Act, right, which has a lot of compliance requirements for companies and organizations. And I think the biggest challenge is that organizations, some certain organizations, not all, but the less forward-thinking ones, see it as a reputational hazard to have a complaint made in their organization, whereas actually the loss to your reputation comes from the fact that you don't have an ICC, an internal complaints committee set up. or the fact that, your employees don't feel safe enough to come forward and complain. And that's the thing with women's rights, right? Having a high rate of complaint in a way is a sign of, is a sign of faith that women have in your criminal justice system or your internal, disciplinary system. And, having a low rate of complaint like we do in India in the criminal justice system, it's really only a sign that women don't feel confident approaching the law when it comes to, crimes like rape and other, forms of sexual violence. So organizations sometimes are a bit reluctant to understand that this does not reflect poorly on you if you have complaints coming to your internal complaints committee. It actually reflects better on you because it shows that you're taking it seriously. It shows that you're taking it proactively. It shows that women in your organization feel safe enough to come forward. But they don't often see it like that. They try, it's always like try to silence it or tamp it down or dissuade people from invoking the remedies available to them under the law. That's one. I think there's a lot of times this happens, of course, less so with children, more so with adult women, that there's a kind of suspicion. Did she lead him on? Was she, there's a lot of times in cases of sexual harassment, the sort of narrative that gets created around the complainant tends to be along the lines of, oh, she's sleeping with the boss to get ahead, and now that things have gone sour, or now that she's got what she wants, now she's filed a complaint, that kind of thing. So there's a suspicion that people have of, and I think it ultimately also comes down to the fact that at some level, a lot of people are just uncomfortable with women being in the workplace at all, with women asserting themselves. And it comes out in these ways. When it comes to children, we don't have too much really when it comes to organizations, employment organizations and things like that. There is a proposal now to have, specific child rights policies being enacted. But generally you do find that not enough workplaces invest in things like creches, or even take things seriously like giving people who have caregiving responsibilities towards children, sufficient time to take care of those responsibilities without it becoming, a sort of black mark against them in their employment record. So that kind of thing, yeah. But a lot of it, as I said, there's a reputational fear. There is a suspicion. There is also just, I think, an inertia that until something really comes up and forces us to act, like say the Me Too movement, we don't really need to be proactive about it. That's the sort of mindset that you're up against.
Yeah, I do agree that I actually believe that when organizations think that by not filing cases against sexual harassment or not acknowledging them, they think that like it's going to ruin their reputation, but it actually reflects strongly on them because it shows that they're taking action on that. So, and obviously more women would feel safer to come to that organization rather than a firm that does not take action. So I definitely agree with that, ma'am. And ma'am, this is kind of a theoretical question. Could you tell us about some of the important bills and acts that have been enacted for the protection of women and children that are important to us?
Wow, that's a lot. In India, we seem to think that legislation is the answer to everything. So we have, for women, for instance, you have, of course, general provisions of the Indian Penal Code that relate both to women and children. You have laws against sati, Dowry Prohibition Act. You have Domestic Violence, Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplace. You have all kinds of, Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, Indecent Representation of Women Act. You have, you name it, there is a law for it. When it comes to children, again, you have, laws against child labor, laws against child marriage, right to education, protection of children from sexual offenses, the POCSO Act. the Juvenile Justice Act that looks at both, children who are in conflict with the law as well as children who need protection of the law, who don't have sufficient care being provided for any reason, within their home and require the assistance of the state. You have things like laws against female feticide, prenatal diagnostic technique act. You have right to education, I think I've already mentioned, food security. I mean, every aspect of our lives is pretty much governed by a law. So, yeah. And then you, of course, have laws for women in the workplace specifically, maternity benefits, other prevention of discrimination. You have laws that relate to women's rights, matrimonial rights, rights on divorce, and custody-related laws, and alimony, which again, many of these are overlap between women's rights and children's rights.
Yes.
And many of them are, on their own. Equal remuneration, ensuring that women are paid the same amount as men for similar kind of work. You have laws on, orphanages and all kinds of things.
Yeah. I think there are new laws coming every year. So, and I think there are a lot of amendments coming to previous acts as well, just to make it more inclusive. And this is kind of a deep question. Why do you think certain cases in India take so many months or maybe even years for serving justice to the victims? And I think I've seen this especially in cases of sexual harassment, where if I take an example of, let's say, the Nirbhaya case, which took almost 10 years to give justice to the girl. So, ma'am, what is your opinion on why do you think these cases take so long to get resolved?
I think it's correct to say that it's only these kind of cases. Fact of the matter is, all cases take a really long time in this country. And I've never understood when people say, oh, this case there should be fast tracked for, these kind of cases. All cases should be fast tracked in a sense. What does it mean? And if a case can be fast tracked, what does it mean? We have certain procedures in place, right? That some of them take time. The accused person also has rights in our criminal justice system. You have the right to take a certain amount of time to prepare your evidence and prepare your case and file a reply and all of that. And yes, of course, there are structural problems in our judiciary. There are problems in our legal industry. These, I really couldn't even go into all of it right now, but some part of the delay, or what is perceived as delay, right? It's also important to understand that what is perceived as delay by an ordinary person reading a newspaper in a headline grabbing case, and they think, okay, these rape cases, they're really taking, Nirbhaya case, for example, it's taking so much time. And why do rape cases take so much time? There are lakhs and crores of cases that take the same amount of time that don't get that kind of attention. So I think sensationalizing it would be unfair, because while a small part of it is on account of, basic procedural requirements that maybe a non-lawyer finds difficult to appreciate or is unaware of, there is a large part of it that is because of structural problems in our judicial and legal industry, our judicial system and our legal industry. The overburdening of the courts, the sort of, I think, reluctance to, or really it's a sort of patchy adoption, I would say, across the country of, digitization and other speedier mechanisms. What happens in Delhi is very different from what happens in other parts of the country, for example. And so if you think the Nirbhaya case going on in Delhi took a really long time, then, my friend, you have to see what happens to cases in parts of the country that get zero attention in the media. Delhi is in fact very fortunate that way. So that should give some perspective. So some long-term, I think, changes have to be made. There is, of course, the problem of the way lawyers function and the adjournments and, the fact that judges too are very quick to give adjournments sometimes. But the bigger problem, I think, is more of an overburdening of the system and a sort of slow pace of reform on that front. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree. There are definitely structural issues, but I think that we are moving in a positive way forward. Like there are cases that are getting solved quicker. And in the end of the day, you do have to follow all protocol because you need to weigh justice equally to both sides. So, and my last question, ma'am, this is quite open-ended. What are some tips you would like to give to aspiring students who want to become lawyers in the future or are preparing for exams like CLAT and want to get into law school?
Okay, I am pre-CLAT. Okay, so I have no idea what CLAT is like. I barely have any recollection of what my own entrance exams were like, but I'm from a time where we wrote different entrance exams for different colleges. So, I think every Sunday in May was one or the other entrance exam.
Oh.
That's how it was. But in general, I would say just one is think it is, a 5-year law school is not for everyone, right? Think about why you want to do that as opposed to a 3-year graduation and then 3 years of law, because, I think the idea that you're saving that 1 year is not that important at the end of the day. But, maybe doing a 3-year graduation will give you a different kind of exposure and perspective. I myself am from a 5-year law program and I loved it and I have zero regrets, but I do think it's not for everybody, especially for people who, I think law has in a way become the new engineering. Like a lot of people are doing it without really, it's sort of like become the engineering of the humanities.
Yeah.
That, it's just something everybody does and then we'll think about what we want to do with our lives later. But first, let's just, write this exam and I think a little more carefully, I think about why you want to do it. It is a weird kind of environment. It's one thing if, you really want to do that and you're, very clear. If you're not very sure and you just want to keep your options open, then maybe, really seriously, I would say do graduation first. Do a BA in something, anything, history, political science, economics. Just don't worry so much about that 1 year or, what if I get, history and not economics or something. You know what? You will learn a lot either which way. And most of it is not going to come from the classroom. Okay, let me be very clear on that. Other than that, I think law is a great, very versatile degree, whether you do it as a 3-year program or a 5-year program. People from people I went to law school with are doing all kinds of things now, not just, corporate law, litigation, or legal academia. Those are the 3 sort of, conventional these things, but people are, whether even within academia, for instance, people are doing so much more interdisciplinary stuff. People are mixing it up and, with 1 foot in litigation or 1 foot in policy, 1 foot in academia, there's that. People, are doing things like journalism, working as, followed up law with, say, chartered accountancy. Law is relevant in every field, right? There is no industry where law is irrelevant. Everybody is always going to be happy to have somebody with a law degree. So it's a very versatile education. It's extremely socially, politically, economically relevant. And it's great. It really gives you a good insight into society. You look at laws from, you're trained in law school to not just see things from your own little bubble. You read cases and you when you're, say you even do simulation exercises where you're drafting legislation or you're drafting policy, and you are forced to think then of, how does this benefit, to go back to, Gandhi's old this saying, how does this benefit the person at the bottom of society? And, it's a great perspective that legal education provides. It's I think it opens up employment in all kinds of fields. This is, again, not to say that it should become the engineering of the humanities, but it is, I would just say to go in there with an open mind. Don't be stuck on, I want to do this, specialize in, this kind of corporate law and, join this particular law firm, or I want to specialize in criminal law and, join this particular senior advocate. Go in there with an open mind and see where it takes you. And I think generally, whether it is law school or any other kind of undergraduate education, it's important to just try different things, read different things, and just try and give yourself a huge diversity of exposure, because that's what those years are all about. I can't tell you how sorry I feel for all the kids whose undergraduate education has been online for the last 2 years.
Yeah, same.
I really hope it's different for you guys.
Everyone is built different. Like law is a changing field. Like there are more than, like, you don't just have corporate, criminal, and civil law. Like I have seen like people mixing up fields like finance and like real estate.
I mean, I know people, people from my law school are there, as I said, some are working as journalists, some are working in hospitals, providing, say, medical legal advice. Some are, people can be working in all kinds of spheres. People are working with Netflix, and not just for, corporate legal advice to Netflix, of course, some companies like that, but, just really interesting stuff like giving, doing a once over of the content they're producing to see, does this, violate any potential laws? Does this, is this something that can, open you up to some kind of mob action or censorship claim, all kinds of, there's so much stuff, whether it's, all your social media, everybody always needs legal advice. So anytime, and climate change is another big area where lawyers are in high demand. And ultimately, look at it. What are the skills that you need to be a lawyer? People say, oh, everybody tells me I should become a lawyer because I'm, I argue really well. I'm so argumentative, right? I'm sure so many of your classmates would have heard that, right? The real skill, I think, is close reading, right? You need to be able to read tons and tons of material in a day. You need to be able to look for every word. It's, you need to have that kind of love of language, understand when, an off or a for makes a difference, that maybe that's not just a typo, maybe that really changes everything. That one preposition changes everything in a sentence. You need to have attention to detail. You need to be incredibly detail oriented. Those are the skills that people need. Those are the skills that law school provides you. Those are the skills which, if you have, you should really consider a career in law. It's really not about being argumentative and, having that kind of courtroom flamboyance. My lord, that's not what it is. It's about the daily hard work, that goes into coming up with the argument. Even if most of the time, at least for the first 20 years of your career as a litigator, for example, you're going to be briefing somebody else to argue, because that's the way the industry is set up, that senior advocates, judges are not going to, pay attention if, a junior person stands up and argues. That's the way the whole this thing. So you're not even going to get to be, showing off your great argumentative skills that you honed in parliamentary debates or whatever.
Yeah.
It's going to be your ability to separate issues, your ability to construct an argument, your ability to read the fine print. Those are the skills that you really need to be thinking about.
Yeah, so I think in my school also I have seen like children in like the Model United Nations circuit or like in the debate circuit, and if there's a student which does really well, everyone is just like, oh, you're so good, you should probably go into a lawyer. You can argue so well, you will be a great lawyer. But I don't think that's how it works. It's also more about like literature, understanding, application, because that's what comes in handy at the end of the day when you're actually fighting for a case. So yes, ma'am, that's all the questions I had. Thank you so much for taking the time to interact with us. And I'm certain that this was a great learning experience for everyone watching.
Thank you. I had a really good time, and I'm so impressed with kids and all the things that you're doing in school these days. Could never have imagined it when we were in school.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
All right. Bye.
Yes, ma'am. Bye.